Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to See You at USC on Friday night. My name is Dan Toomey, and joining me tonight is Mr. Matt Doig. He is the Assistant Managing Editor to Investigations at the LA Times. It's bound to be a fascinating interview. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for sticking with us throughout the break. Once again, my name is Dan Toomey here for See You at USC on Friday night. Mr. Matt Doig is here with us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here, Dan.
Pleasure to have you on the show. So now, Mr. Doig, you have quite the extensive career in journalism. Just this February, you were named the Assistant Managing Editor to Investigations at the LA Times. But as we've discussed previous to the episode, your history is much longer for your journalistic career. So let's start from the beginning, because this wasn't always the career path for you. Where did it first start?
Well, that sounds like an elegant way to say I'm old, so I appreciate that, Dan. But,
yeah, no problem.
Actually, I started out wanting to be a sports columnist. I was a big basketball fan growing up, and always knew how to write. So that was my initial dream, was to be a sports columnist at the Miami Herald, covering the Miami Heat. But then at one point I was covering a story about a teacher's aide in Florida who had stolen drugs from one of her students, the student's ADHD medicine, and kind of got on the hunt of how they had hired this person, and she had a criminal record, I found out. So it was like my first little mini investigation as to how they hired this teacher's aide with a criminal record. And I got kind of bit by the thrill of the hunt on doing an investigation, and then that's how I got into investigative journalism. Really?
And so now you're here at the LA Times, and you just came from a position in Seattle, correct?
Yes, I was the investigations editor at Seattle Times before this. Before that, I was the investigations editor at Newsday in New York, and then before that was an investigative editor and also reporter in Sarasota, Florida.
And so now to separate, to just get a broader idea as to what exactly an investigative journalist does for those watching who might not exactly be familiar with it, what distinguishes an investigative journalist from the average columnist?
Right. Well, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. It's the investigative team has the luxury of not having to worry about what's going to be in the paper tomorrow. We can look further out, take the time to dig through documents and records, and do extensive interviews and do a deeper dive on a subject that requires a lot of time. So. And that could be any number of things, like political corruption or some business type corruption. Or even just some sort of complicated issue that requires a great deal of explanation. So the key ingredient is kind of the time and the resources in order to do it.
Sure. And so where does, I suppose, an investigation start? Where is the source for the story usually? Is it with somebody who comes to you guys, or are you constantly looking for incidences?
We're always looking, so if any of the viewers have any great ideas, they should reach out to me. But it can come from anywhere. I mean, some call, you get a phone call from somebody with a tip. A lot of times it is like a beat reporter who's covering a certain thing, and they, will say, gosh, I saw this little thing on my beat that had me wondering, and I'm wondering if it's a much bigger issue that we could do. So sometimes I'll just be reading the paper, and there'll be something in a story that'll catch my eye, and it'll make me wonder if there's a larger issue going on.
Okay. And so then now is it, so you have investigative journalists. I think just to mention one of the stories that you worked on previously while reporting in New York, there was this very extensive story, and it's very well done, about New York police officers. And so, I mean, would you mind just elaborating upon that story a little bit? Because you edited it, correct?
Yes, that was one of the projects I edited. I just come from Florida, and Florida's got a great public records law. So in Florida, if there's an internal affairs report into an officer who commits some sort of misconduct, the second the sheriff or the police chief signs it, it becomes public to review. So I get to New York, and New York has terrible public records laws, And, we're hearing about, officers doing various things. Like, as soon as I got there, there was a story in Newsday about an officer who was spending day after day parked in his girlfriend's driveway, sleeping with her while he should have been doing his job.
Sure.
So I started saying, oh, let's request these records. And, my colleagues were like, what are you, crazy? Like, this is New York. You can't get any of that stuff. So we decided to go after the story that way and kind of, attack this crazy law that prevented all this information from being public. And it resulted in this, I think we did like a 5 or 6 part series about all these kind of various issues related to police corruption that were being kept hidden by this terrible law.
And so, what was the process like in trying to obtain that information? Because like you mentioned, it wasn't easy to get, right?
No, it wasn't. And the first story that we did came about because, so we couldn't get those records. So I suggested that what we did is start looking through, lawsuits that have been filed. If somebody is suing, you can file a federal lawsuit. So I had reporters going through, I think we went through like 900 lawsuits. And one of my Dynamite reporters found the needle in the haystack. There was a case involving an off-duty cop who was drunk, who shot a cab driver in a road rage incident, and somebody had accidentally loaded the internal affairs file into the court case. It was supposed to be sealed.
Wow.
So she was like, oh my God, I think we have something we should write about now. So that was the first story we wrote about, and it was like this kind of unprecedented window into this one case that that had been kept secret for like 2 years. It had happened a couple years earlier. So that got us rolling on it, and we did a series of stories, and then the last story was kind of this overview about the law and like all that we had found.
And so now from this piece, move forward a few years, and you're on the other side of the country now in Los Angeles. And how is your position as assistant managing editor different from what you've done in the past?
It's really, titles are, titles are kind of.
It's a longer title.
Yeah, exactly. The job I've been doing has been essentially the same thing since even when I was back in it as an investigative reporter. There's like a system, that you follow. You call it like bulletproofing an investigation.
Okay.
So when I was a reporter, it was a system I followed. When I became an editor, I followed it as an editor. I had my reporters follow it, but it's all just about like lining up all the facts and creating kind of an unimpeachable case that you're trying to make.
Sure. And you mentioned how you started out as a reporter for a newspaper. You bobbled around in Phoenix and Florida before ultimately coming to New York. And have you seen any changes in the way investigative reporting has been developed over the past few years? Especially with social media. I know that's tossed around so often now, but does that affect your work?
Yeah, the basics of the job are the same, like the ethics involved and all that, but the tools that have developed, in the last 15, 20 years or so, have kind of changed the game a little bit. When I first was doing investigative projects, we would like do all our work, prepare it for print, and then like a couple weeks before it'd be like, all right, should we do something different for the web? But now it's like as soon as we decide we are doing something, we are talking about what are we going to do. We're meeting with the social media folks to see how we can, push our stuff out. So the digital tools that are available now are like much more of a factor early in the process.
Because I was going to say, does that change at all the way that you gather sources? Because it must be so important for an investigative journalist.
Sure. If you're crowdsourcing something, you're going to want to, go out on that. But that's not even necessarily just true for investigative journalism. If there's like a shooting at a club or something like that, a reporter's immediately going to jump on Facebook and try and find out who was at the club and that type of thing. So, if there's a serial killer who kills somebody and then gets caught, you're immediately going to go on his Facebook page and find out who his Facebook friends are. So, that's true of any reporter.
And so now, being an investigative reporter specifically, I'm curious as to what your view is on programs such as WikiLeaks or gentlemen such as Julian Assange or Edward Snowden. Do you feel like that is also a form of investigative reporting in itself? Despite like WikiLeaks isn't necessarily the New York Times or the LA Times, but does that still qualify?
I wouldn't call that investigative reporting.
Okay.
They are, whether you think they're good or not, they are providing information, but like they're not necessarily vetting everything that's in there always and making sure it's it's accurate. So there's a big difference between saying I've got all these records, here they are,
okay.
versus now I've gone through all those records, contacted all the people who are mentioned in there, like verified them through other ways. So it's a it's a different animal.
Sure. I mean, does that play into, you talked about earlier how the ethical aspects of investigative reporting haven't changed. Does that play into that?
You mean as far as like if I got a treasure trove of documents from WikiLeaks? No,
Yeah.
I mean if we got a bunch of documents, that doesn't change. You still verify that what you have is real. You're still obligated to call the people who are named in those documents and like check with them and let them know, hey, we're doing a story. Do you have anything to say?
Sure.
So just dumping documents online is not the same as what we do. We would not do that without first verifying everything.
And does that ever worry you, just given how quickly information is passed throughout society now? Anybody with a Twitter account can post out information that people will begin to read. Does that ever worry you as a reporter who's, your products are especially, they're cultivated through a long period of time. Does that ever worry you in how people will become misinformed?
Well, it is a concern.
Yeah.
The bigger concern is kind of the people who can't distinguish between something kind of blurted out on Twitter that is kind of next to an LA Times article that's been fully researched and everything. So, it doesn't worry me that people are going to one day say, hey, I'm fine getting all my news from, short bursts from Twitter. Because I think people still value a, fully researched, well-written piece in the LA Times. Yeah.
So you don't really necessarily believe that, because there is the idea that, now that social media is available to us, people won't be as akin to reading longer pieces. But you don't believe that's the case?
No, the stuff my reporters have done for years,
Absolutely.
They are all long pieces, and we check metrics on the web, how the readership of them, but also like the time people invest in them, and I am concerned when we do like a big story, are people going to read this thing? If it's like 6,000 words or something like that. But we'll get a debrief from the web folks, and they'll say, "Oh my God, the engagement time on this set a record." Like that happened to one of the Newsday things. Yeah, like we set some sort of record at Newsday where like a 6-minute plus engagement time on a story, and the web folks were like, "We've never seen that
That's
before."
That's fast. So you've actually seen a stronger engagement time from longer pieces.
Yeah, it's not always the case, but like when we write a long piece, we are thinking, is somebody going to sit down and read this whole thing? It's why we often run the longest pieces on Sunday, because people are more able to like spend the time over a cup of coffee and read through a whole story. So
yeah, and so now at the LA Times, what new aspects do you hope to bring, given your new position there?
Well, look, the LA Times has a storied history of publishing dynamite investigative journalism. That's why I came here. So, so I'm looking to continue that tradition and create the kind of stories that people, come to the paper to see.
Do you think there's anything particular about Los Angeles that makes the job even more alluring, or the opportunities even greater for you?
It's a giant city, and there's tons of money here, and that usually has all the ingredients for things like political corruption, or powerful people preying on the underclass. So all the elements of great journalism exist in Los Angeles.
And you've seen that in past cities as well, like similar instances of corruption or
I spent 4 years at Newsday, which is based on Long Island, and the mechanism that makes Long Island government move is political corruption.
Really?
And yeah. So you don't even have to look very hard for it there. Like
that's funny, really.
Yeah, we were doing tons of political corruption stories there, and it's kind of like what you imagine, like political party bosses, and
that's interesting,
patronage
right? And throughout all of Long Island, or was that Manhattan as well?
Well, we didn't really write about Manhattan. So Long Island, there's like 6 million people on Long Island or something. So, and it's it's a big place. There's 2 separate counties. But yeah, it's just how the system works there, and you start. The answer to every question there was, well, it's a corruption issue or it's patronage or something.
Sure. Now, I actually hate to cut you off. We have to go to a quick break, but if you wouldn't mind sticking around with us for the second half, I would love to talk more about the role of journalists moving forward, if you can stick around.
I can stick around.
All right. For Matt Doig, once again, my name is Dan Toomey, and you're not going to want to go anywhere. Stick with us.
Hi there, Vinny here. You may know me from my other products like the Key Rope. I've got an amazing new product for you that you can't afford to miss. Are you tired of all these remotes? Look at them. They're crazy. What are you, Patrick Stewart? Come on. They got like 10 with like 6 different buttons. You can't do all that math. That's a load of garbage. You can't deal with this. You're the junior VP of sales at Janice Montgomery Scott, who just wants to dance. You know the kid in Bronx Tales actually, he's not even Italian, he's Colombian? Ditch these boring remotes and make out like a Rocky Mountain goat at Christmas. This is the new Trojan Vision Sensation infrared transmitting remote control device. So you come home from work, long day at work, you just want to watch some Trojan Vision. You just press one button, boom, TV's on. No complicated math. Want to pause? Maybe press the pause button. My cousin did the pause button. You want to turn it off? It's over. Press the off button. Just one button. And for all you health nuts out there, that's right. Get this. Trojan Vision remote, 100% gluten-free. That's right. We tried to make one with gluten. Look, doesn't even work. Now call now and get this amazing remote for just $19.99. And call in the next 15 minutes and we'll include a photo of me at my niece Angelina's wedding, free of charge. Come on, guys. I can't do this all day. Trojan Vision, guaranteed to be good for your money. Yeah, no, seriously. I can't be here all day. Yeah, no. I really, like, I got this thing going on the side. Like, use library books, okay? You just go in, right? You get like something like To Kill a Mockingbird. You check it out for like 2 weeks. They don't care. They don't care about that book. Right, you flip that book, give it to a student, like 15 cents. Make 15 cents. I make like 15 cents like every 2 days. It's amazing. It's just like they hemorrhage money. It's incredible.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to See You at USC on Friday night. Once again, my name is Dan Toomey, and alongside me is Mr. Matt Doig. He is the assistant managing editor for two investigations at the LA Times. Four investigations. Right. I got it right.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah. And so a lot of what we talked about in the first half of the episode revolved around your history regarding journalism, some of the other projects that you've worked on previous to the LA Times, and a question that I'm just begging to ask you is, there's a lot, journalists have been in the news, ironically, recently over titles of fake news or a lack of trust between the reader and the journalist. Mm-hmm. Have you seen that, has that applied to your work in recent history? Have you seen that there hasn't been this connection between the reader and the journalist as there has been in the past?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems to be amplified now, but It's really, it's been, the credibility issue in media has been around for a long time. So, one of the things you see journalists doing a lot, David Farenhold at the Washington Post, who just won a Pulitzer, he did the stories on Trump's charitable giving or lack of giving. But one of the things he did was he involved the reader in his reporting process a lot. He would post documents online, tweet stuff out, and tell the reader, this is what I'm looking into. If anybody has any tips or knows anything about this, contact me. So he involved the reader in the process of doing it, which I think is a good way to, kind of boost credibility. So the people who did that and then saw the ultimate story is I saw how he built this story. So I think that is a good way to kind of educate readers. We're not just making things up. There's a process that is followed on this.
Sure. And where do you think this sense of mistrust with the media first came from?
I'm sure it's been around forever. I mean, anytime somebody is the target of a devastating investigation that is going to end their career, they will blame the media to kind of distract from the issue. So Another tool that we use, with online, you can like post documents online. So, that's another way to say, look, if you don't believe me, here is the document we are writing about, so read it for yourself and decide.
Sure.
So, that whole idea of you can't trust the media, what they're about to say about me because it's really bad, has probably been around since the first, devastating article was written several hundred years ago.
And you mentioned earlier about how integrating the reader with the journalist is one of the keys into building that relationship. I mean, do you think, are there any other methods that you believe journalists should take moving forward to have their audience trust them more, would you say?
Well, when I talked earlier about bulletproofing investigation, a lot of that is just being transparent about, in the story saying, this is where we got the documents, these are the people we talked to. There's kind of a social science method to it where in a lot of like big complicated investigations, we'll do a little separate story, like how we did the story, kind of explaining this is where we got the data from,
Okay.
And so you're basically like laying out your methodology there. So if somebody doesn't believe you, you've left a trail of breadcrumbs that they could follow and, would reach the same conclusion you did. So it's just about being fully transparent in the story.
And now for, I suppose, like young journalism students who are interested in entering investigative reporting, what are, the first commandments that you would say they need to follow?
You got to put in your work at a lower level and like learn the basics first of reporting. Yeah, spend some time covering a beat, and it's a lot easier to make a mistake and learn from a mistake on a small story than it is when you're taking on like the district attorney or something like that. There's one professional organization I'm a member of. It's called Investigative Reporters and Editors, IRE. And, there's an annual conference. I go there every year, not every year, but I go there a lot. And it's basically like the best and brightest in journalism, like David Varenholt, Walt Bogdanich, Dana Priest, kind of the heavyweights of investigative journalism are there, and they are just saying, this is how I do the job. They're like disclosing all their secrets. So I went there for the first time back when I knew absolutely nothing. It was like, oh my God, I can't believe these people are telling me all their, juicy secrets of how to do this job. Yeah. So,
what were some of the, not necessarily they have to give away those secrets, but what were some of the lessons that you learned?
That's the whole point. They're not even secrets. They're saying things like, like when they have an investigative target, they will, basically, download every story that's ever been written that person about LexisNexis and read everything. Right. They talk about how to like organize complicated, sets of information and documents and, how to use data. It's basically all the tools that go into creating high-end journalism. They tell you how to do it.
Wow. And so you mentioned earlier about there's specific stories that really got you first involved in investigative journalism. I'm wondering, are there any particular cases that will always, remain close to your heart as very important to what you do?
When I was a reporter, I did this story on this. I was at the police department for something totally different in the evidence room, which reeked like marijuana, which was very funny, I thought. But I was there to pick up something else, and while I was there, I was like, "What's the oldest piece of evidence you have in here?" And they're like, "Oh, we've got some stuff from the Walker murder from 50 years ago."
Really?
And I was like, "Really? What's that?" And they're like, "Oh, you don't know about it? Oh, it's this old kind of famous case. It's actually written about and briefly mentioned in Cold Blood, because the two guys the two killers from In Cold Blood were briefly suspects in this murder."
Okay.
So I didn't know anything about it, so I went and read what had been written, and then it was this unsolved murder, 50 years old, family of four, very similar to the In Cold Blood murder. And I said to the police department, I was like, it's been almost 50 years, like, let me see the file on this thing and write a big story about it. And they're like, no, it's an active investigation. I was like, come on, you guys haven't done anything on this. So I made the case, and they're like, okay. So they gave me these like 7 volumes of investigative material that they had compiled over 50 years. And I did this big 3-day takeout on this unsolved murder. And, for years I would get emails from people who were like, I read that story back when it was written.
Really?
And I was in Florida for vacation, but I live in Iowa. Like, has that thing been solved yet?
Wow. So people were still holding on to this.
Yeah, for years I was getting emails about it. And it's one of my favorite stories I've ever worked on.
Yeah.
Just And I'm kind of pissed that it never got solved. I mean, that was my goal, is to like really write the hell out of the thing.
Sure.
And maybe get, you know, somebody with a guilty conscience to come forward and confess to it or something. But it remains unsolved. But it's a damn good story.
Yeah. And so going off of that, I mean, it's so fascinating that people were still interested in the outcome of it. And just given that, I'm just dying to ask you, what do you see as your overall goal as an investigative journalist, like your role for society at large?
I mean, there's like an old a line in journalism about, you want to do a story where it's called the Hey Marge story or something, where the husband picks up the paper and he's like, hey Marge, you got to come read this. So like, I like to do stories where I'm imagining the reader picking up the paper and it's like they are telling their friends, you have to read this, or it's like, you know, ruins their day because they're so outraged about what they are reading, and, you know, so grateful that we are exposing it. So I like to do stories where that's the connection with the reader, where they're just so engrossed in what you've done, and it's like, you know, their life is improved because of what we've done.
And a lot of what we've talked about today has relied on a connection with the reader. We talked about how that is how you'll build a better relationship with them. And do you feel as though there will be a greater connection in terms of the investigative process with the reader, but like between the reader and the journalist? Do you feel like that will apply more into how cases are investigated in the future?
Well, I mean, you know, everything we do for the readers. I mean,
Absolutely.
you know, if we, you know, and we need more readers. So if you're not a subscriber to the LA Times, you should subscribe. But yeah, I mean, if we're
subtle plug, yeah.
Right. If we're writing things and the reader is not engaged in it, then we have totally failed. So yeah, we need to involve the readers.
And one of my final questions, we have about 2 minutes left, but one of my final questions is, because investigative journalism is unique in that it's not freelance and it's usually with a group, correct?
Yes.
I mean, do you find it more difficult to work with a group on a story or to pursue one on your own?
I mean, it depends on the group. I've you know, been lucky most of my career to work with very collaborative people who are like, yeah, I mean, you know, they check their egos at the door, and there's like you know, a kind of a mission that we're all on and pursuing the same goal. So, you know, working as a group is, you know, these stories are so broad and complicated. I mean, not just the group of reporters doing a story, but like these things have become almost as complicated as a movie, where you know, you're involving the web folks and social media folks and the print design, and, you know, the lawyers involved. So it's almost like a production company.
Yeah, because it's not necessarily that it's all just reporters in that room, correct?
Exactly.
And in your job as assistant managing editor, I mean, have you found it more daunting than your positions in the past?
Nah, it's the same job.
Really?
I mean, yeah. I mean, like I said, it's the you know, there's a system that develops, and you just kind of follow that system. It's almost like paint by numbers at this point. I mean, the daunting parts are every story there are problems that pop up, and you have to like problem solve. Yeah, it's like a set of records that, you know, you thought you'd be able to get, but the government agency's saying you can't get it. So you have to problem solve and say, well, how are we going to do this story if we can't get the records?
Oh, okay. I mean, what are the kind of problems that you usually run into for an investigative
You know,
story?
what records are we going to get? You know, convincing reluctant sources to talk to us. You know, it's something that's you know, completely complicated, and then we're going to have to explain it for the reader. You know, those type of things.
Sure. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for tonight. But Mr. Doig, thank you so much for being on the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Once again, for Mr. Doig, my name is Dan Toomey here at See You at USC on Friday night. We'll see you next week.
You're watching Trojan Vision. For more of your favorite shows, check us